Welcome to Context. I'm Bakhtiar Sanov. Today we examine a pivotal development in the transatlantic security landscape. The United States is reviewing its extensive network of military installations across Europe. This review comes at a time when the war in Ukraine grinds into its third year. NATO's eastern flank remains on high alert, and Russia continues to press its military and political advantage. With over 100,000 U.S. troops stationed across Europe, these bases have long served as linchpins for NATO deterrence, logistics hubs for operations in the Middle East, and forward paths in America's global strategy. But as Washington rethinks its military posture, questions arise. What does this mean for European security, NATO unity, and the future of the Russia-Ukraine conflict? To discuss these developments, I'm joined by NATO foreign policy expert Tarık Oğuzlu and political analyst Alexandra Filipenko. Mr. Tarık Oğuzlu and Alexandra Filipenko, thank you for joining us on A News.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. Tarık Oğuzlu, what are the driving factors behind the U.S. review of its military footprint in Europe and at this time?
I think the picture is quite clear since the time Trump administration began his term. The Trump, by default, has been for a very long time been arguing that the American presence in Europe is obsolete in today's international political environment. The Europeans are rich enough to cover their defense expenditures, so the United States will no longer tolerate the European free riding on American shoulders. So this has been a very important crisis in transatlantic relationship. But maybe this is a boon on the part of the Europeans, because this seems to have pushed many European Union member states to increase their expenditures in defense, and also maybe taking on responsibility for dealing with the challenge in Ukraine. I am not of the view that the Americans are very much clear on the idea that the American troops should be pulled back in a very short period of time, but questioning the relevance of their troops in Europe. And also, this is a kind of push on the part of the Americans regarding the Europeans. So they are encouraging the Europeans to take on responsibility for defense. We have to look at it from this particular perspective.
Ms. Filipenko, how do you think, is this primarily a strategic reassessment, or does it reflect broader political and budgetary pressures in Washington?
Most probably it reflects the willingness of the Trump administration to really move on, and that is exactly what Marco Rubio, the state secretary, has said upon leaving Paris. He said, it's not our war, we didn't start it. If it's not possible to end the war in Ukraine, we need to move on. That's exactly what Mr. Rubio said, and he is pressuring probably the Russian side, because although this message was not directed at anyone exactly, but probably he's pressuring this way the Russian side. He said we're talking about a matter of days, whether or not this is doable. So this reflects the idea of the Trump administration that actually the main focus should be China, the main focus should be trade, and the main focus, as we have been seeing in the works of State Secretary Marco Rubio, should be the American continent. Right now, the main focus of the Trump administration, one of the focuses of the Trump administration, is the American continent and the growing influence of China in the American continent, I mean the Latin American countries, of course, and the willingness of the Trump administration to counter China, at least in Latin America, for sure, most powerfully over there, and in general in trade. So I think this is like the last straw, I would put it this way, of the Trump administration saying that, yes, now we need to decide, otherwise we will move on, and we want to move on. And as we've been seeing, Europe is mostly ready to step up and to do more about helping Ukraine. So the United States are now pressuring Russia in this matter.
Tarık, what do you think? How crucial are current U.S. bases in Germany, Poland, and the Baltics for NATO's deterrence posture against Russia?
I think they are very much important because for a long period of time they fulfilled very important missions, as you have just pointed out in your report. So they have been contributing Europeans' deterrence capacity vis-à-vis Russia. They have been acting as logistical hotspots in terms of American military operations outside Europe, across the globe in one way or another. And also the presence of these bases and more than 100,000 American troops deployed across the continent seems to have been given a message to Europeans that we are with you, we will always support you. So we take the Russians as a serious potential challenge to European and Western security. So from a principled perspective, from a psychological perspective, and also from a real political perspective, the presence of those missiles is important. But we should also not forget the fact that even though Europeans develop a defense capability on their own, they will not be in a position to deal with any potential challenge to their security without the Americans in the mid to long term, because they don't have enough resources to do that, and they need to really increase lots of money on these capabilities. As of today, they are not in a position to do that, despite all kind of EU level promises to increase defense expenditures. We know that the European Commission has already decided to increase up to $1 trillion, and also the German government, incoming German government, has already made a big promise to spend nearly $1 trillion on defense and infrastructure. But these are good beginnings for Europeans, but they need to take lots of time to fulfill their missions.
So, Ms. Filipenko, could a redistribution or reduction of bases weaken deterrence, or are there smarter, more agile alternatives the United States is considering?
At least for now, we don't know what steps exactly will the United States take, what are the ideas that the Pentagon has right now. But we definitely understand that on the one hand, the United States want to be less involved in international affairs in general. The same State Secretary Marco Rubio has said repeatedly that the United States is not a world security, is not someone who is taking care of a world security. They don't want to be seen this way. They are not the world policeman, rather, as Marco Rubio has put it. So now we are seeing that Trump is moving to the isolationist way of handling issues, although we understand that in the State Department, as well as in Pentagon, there are realists who understand how difficult the situation in the world is. So most probably they will really choose and they will really think about new ways of securing, although we are seeing the plans of moving the troops out, and this sends a huge, an immense signal to all parties involved and to all countries of the world. Of course, Donald Trump wants Europe to step up in general, and he wants other countries of all regions to be more agile and to be ready to counter any threats that they have in their respective regions. But what we are seeing is definitely a new approach to the international relations. It reflects what Trump has been saying, America first, and the idea of moving more into internal affairs, or at least to the affairs of your own continent. But of course, I think this poses some kind of a threat if the United States doesn't step up in some other ways of security. But as I've already said, there are realists in the State Department and in the Pentagon that understand that probably other steps should be taken.
Tarek, how would such a review impact operational readiness, especially in scenarios involving rapid deployment to Eastern Europe?
By the way, we should not jump to the conclusions that the Americans are really serious to pull back their troops from Europe. And also, I don't think that the United States under Trump administration is pursuing a kind of isolationist foreign policy. The US has been very much involved in global politics. But what sets the Trump administration apart from administration is that this administration is acting quite unilaterally, meaning that they don't want to take into account the security concerns and priorities of traditional American allies. And on the other hand, they want to get into close contact with other big powers across the globe, such as China and Russia. Again, Trump doesn't see Russia as a primary security threat leveled against Europe, extent the previous Biden administration did. Regarding the question you posed, I think if Americans are serious to somehow the troops in Europe, they will begin this process in Germany, maybe Italy, in Netherlands, but most likely they will move or shift their military troops to countries bordering Russia. They have already enough troops in Poland and Baltic republics, so maybe they will increase the number of troops there because they are aware of the fact that the Europeans on their own are not in a position to face off the Russian challenge, and Americans are not naive. I don't think that they will leave the Europeans high and dry in this process.
Ms. Filipenko, your views are also important in this question. How are European NATO members reacting to news of this review? Is there anxiety about a reduced U.S. commitment?
There is definitely anxiety, but I must say, and I cannot stress enough that during the meeting of foreign ministers in Brussels, of NATO foreign ministers in Brussels, we've heard the commitment of the United States to be a part of NATO and to stay in NATO. No one's talking about leaving NATO. Marco Rubio said it multiple times. All American officials have said it multiple times, and all NATO officials from the American side have repeated this fact that the United States are not leaving. United States are staying put. The only thing that United States want to see, they want to see the increase of spending on the defense, the defense spending from 2% now going on to more percentage. But we don't know. We still don't know what the figure is yet. Probably in The Hague, it will be figured out. But we've heard what United States want is they want more military spending, but they're not going anywhere. So there is this, I would say, anxiety about the fact that maybe the United States will start spending less on security. But if all other countries showcase that they are on this track to 5% or at least to 3% or to at least 2%, some countries don't even give 2% right now. And we see that, for example, the UK, even their plan to go over 3% is only at 2035 in the year 2035. So this means they're far off from 5%. But anyways, the United States have said if they see this track to 5% or to more percentages, maybe 3-4, then that would mean that the United States are staying put and they are there to support its allies and to support all countries of NATO. So of course there is this anxiety, but I would say that this anxiety is based mainly on the reportings of the press and also on some things that President Trump has said. We know him as quite an extravagant president who can be very free in his discussions and in his ideas, in expressing his ideas. So that's where the anxiety comes from. But when we talk about NATO officials, we see only security and guarantees that the United States are not going anywhere.
So Tarek, could this be an opportunity for Europe to assume more responsibility for its own defense infrastructure?
It's for sure. That's the most important conclusions we are supposed to draw from such kind of discussions. But, you know, Europeans have been trying to do that for a long period of time. You can even argue that during the Cold War years, we had a kind of tension between transatlantic allies concerning burden sharing. And over the last decade, in particular since the Russian invasion of Crimea in 2014, there is a growing degree of determination on the part of European Union member states to build up their security and defense capability. We don't even need to mention President Macron of France saying that the strategic autonomy is what is required for the Europeans to do that. And in recent years, and it is very clear, there is a kind of geopolitical, realpolitical awakening across the European nations. What is happening in Germany is quite transformational. And for a long period of time, Germans have been quite close to the idea that they need to decrease their social expenditures and invest lots of money on defense. But they are now doing this is what they are doing now. So this is a kind of very important earth-shaking development. So I think in one way or another, the Europeans need to answer this question. Are we going to become a geopolitical player in the emerging post-American multipolar international environment, or are we going to serve as a kind of playground for other global heavyweights? So that's the question they need to answer as soon as possible, of course.
So, Ms. Filipenko, in your opinion, how is the Kremlin interpreting the U.S. review of its military bases in Europe? As a sign of weakness, flexibility, or something else?
I think the Kremlin sees it as a sign, as a rather an opportunity to talk about the division of the world. That's exactly what President Putin has been dreaming about, to sit down with President Trump or with any other president of the United States and draw those red lines. This is exactly what Putin has been striving for and really dreamt about. As we've seen many times, he repeated that the greatest tragedy of the 20th century is the collapse of the Soviet Union. Not the Great War, not the Second World War, not the Holocaust, nothing. No, the collapse of the Soviet Union as the greatest tragedy of the 20th century. President Putin said it many, many times. So this would mean that what he wants is the restoration of the Soviet Union in the borders that he can now gather. And of course, he wanted Ukraine to be part of this greater Russia, let's put it this way. Now we see Belarus being part of it. And what President Putin really wants is to sit down and to divide the world, just as if it's been in that wonderful time before the greatest tragedy of the 20th century. Just like it's been during the Cold War, when there were spheres of influence of Russia, of the Soviet Union, of course, and of the United States. So this is what they are striving for. And this most probably, right now, less American bases in Europe and around the world in general is the opportunity to start those talks, to really think about dividing the world. So I would say that they see it as a tiny, tiny opportunity. As of now, of course, it's not a step in that direction, but at least a tiny opportunity to at least start talking about it with the American counterparts.
Tarek, ultimately, how might this review influence Ukraine's perception of U.S. commitment and support in the long term?
I think that this is a very crucial question we have to answer, because we already know the story that the current Ukrainian administration, President Zelensky, is not that much happy to see that President Trump of the United States very much questioned the importance of Ukraine in European security, very much belittling the degree of challenge the Russian Federation is posing towards Europe and Ukraine. So even President Zelensky, from my own perspective, is not happy to see that the Americans are trying to outsource the main responsibility in Ukraine to Europeans, because Zelensky is very much aware of the fact that the Europeans are not in a position to do that without American military involvement on the ground. Looking to the problem from Zelensky's perspective, and President Trump trying to find a solution to the problem through bilateral negotiations with President Putin of Russia is a kind of nightmarish scenario, because these two leaders might, potentially speaking, impose a kind of unholy peace on Ukraine. So if Europeans are not enough to make this unlike the Ukraine push to accept a kind of unwanted, unholy peace agreement. So this is quite likely. Forget about the kind of maneuvering on the part of the Ukrainian administration to curry favor with the United States, mending fences with the United States, or making American president feel happy. But in essence, they are not that much happy at all with the current position of the Trump administration.
So many thanks to our guests, NATO foreign policy expert Tarık Oğuzlu and political analyst Alexandra Filipenko for their insights and expertise. Thank you very much, and thank you for talking to A News.